the Wilkinson resignation is something that's coming off of news, a big sort of news dump kind of week for Portland Thorns. And then maybe this is out of chronological order, but that Wilkinson resignation came after a certain bit of news out of the Thorns as well. There was pretty big news. Merritt Paulson, majority owner of both the Portland Timbers and the Portland Thorns. He made the announcement that he's going to sell the Portland Thorns franchise, not the Timbers club, and sort of begin the next steps to try and find the new owners for this franchise. And this is something, this decision, I think, is something that has sort of been brewing, I think, for a little while. I think public opinion around Paulson and the Thorns specifically has not been good, right? And there has been a pretty vocal contingent out there that believes, Paulson shouldn't have any affiliation with the club any longer. And a statement was put out, and he said that he's going to go ahead, and he believes it's in the best interest of the Thorns to have a new owner so the club can operate at the league level with a fresh voice and be a driving force for the NWSL. And within that also said that he's pledged $1 million to establish a new player safety office at the league. Commissioner Berman just ultimately reiterating the collaborative efforts between the Thorns and the league for new ownership, saying that she supports the decision to sell the Thorns and the commitment to aid in a smooth transition for a new ownership group in Portland, and a $1 million contribution to the league. So a little bit of news within the announcement of the news that Paulson is going to sell the Thorns, that there's going to be a new NWSL player safety department as well.
Yeah, that is also huge. And this comes after it was early October, right? That Merritt Paulson stepped down as the Thorns CEO, and now he's announcing that he's selling it. So this was kind of the next step in this, and really what people were waiting for. They knew he stepped down. That happened immediately following the Yates report's investigation results, and now the fact that that's going to happen. He's been in the NWSL as a founding owner since 2012, but because he was involved so heavily in keeping quiet about Paul Riley and his wrongdoings in coaching around the league and with the players, that is a major reason for this to happen. So it's also couples a little bit with the Rhian Wilkinson news, because in Rhian Wilkinson's article with Meg Linehan in The Athletic about stepping down and resigning, there was talks that the club was under too much stress to bring this to HR, that we couldn't let this go public. We couldn't make it a big deal because of everything that was happening in the ownership with Portland. But I mean, you got to have good bones at a club, right? And I think that this is a great step in doing that, with Merritt Paulson saying, I'm selling it. It has been in his family, right? His dad was an owner. He's a minority owner. It's continuing to kind of trickle down, and the sale of the Portland Thorns is going to be very, very interesting, because we remember Washington Spirit last year sold for $35 million in a sale, which is fantastic. And that's a large sum of money for an NWSL club. And then we look at Portland Thorns and the type of club that this is, with the pedigree. It's 3 trophies. It has the partnership with the Timbers, being in such a soccer city in Portland, Oregon. There's just, this also could have a really large price tag on it, right? And this would be a great club for someone to own. So I think that also kind of sets the standard and sets the bar really high for what the future of Portland Thorns want to be. But now it's finding an owner, right? There's so many more steps to come from it. But the first thing was him announcing that he is going to sell it for sure.
Yeah, there's similar to all the other news that we've been chatting about this morning. I mean, there's a lot of layers to this as well. Even though there was the announcement about the decision to find new ownership for the Thorns. Still a lot of conversations and questions about what that's going to look like. As Paulson said, I'm not selling the Timbers. I'm only selling the Thorns, and how that dynamic will continue to exist in the future, because these are unlike the Spirit. sale that we did a lot of covering of
Mhm.
during the 2021 season. This is a little different. That's a club that just was an independent club on its own, operating on its own legs. And then you've got a Thorns team that kind of came up with a Timber side. And this was two teams in two professional leagues linked by, uh, training schedules and
Yeah.
stadiums, facilities, etc. So
Ticket sales, game schedules, training
yeah,
schedules, right? Ticket scales, sales. There's
yeah,
so much else. The game day operations, like
yeah.
everything goes into it.
Yeah, so it's gonna, like you said, it's gonna be something to pay attention to and see what that looks like in the future, because there's no timeline on this. That's the other thing in this announcement, that there's not a timeline to have a new ownership group, by the start of 2023, let's say. That wasn't listed within any of the releases or the statements, and it was placed in there, I think, on purpose, because I think this is the type of sale that's going to probably take some time. I think if you're trying to look and find the right owners for this specific franchise. And it wasn't just Portland who had an announcement in terms of potential change at the majority ownership stake level. The Chicago Red Stars also in a similar position. Additional reporting by Sportico saying that Chicago Red Stars owner Arnim Whistler had hired a third party to help begin the next steps of selling his majority ownership stake. Had hired Inner Circle Sports and Investment Bank to go ahead and help that process. That this was something that was ultimately confirmed to Chicago Red Stars shareholders across the board. So you're talking just hours after the initial Thorns announcement by Paulson, and then there was the reporting on the Chicago Red Stars side of things as well. So it was a little bit of a pivot.
Right.
We're seeing sort of these next steps compared to October for both of these franchises. I think for Chicago, you had in October, when all of the Yates report was made public, Whistler previously issued a statement saying that, hey, I'm going to step away from decision making within the organization. And then the Chicago Red Stars board said, actually, no, you're going to be removed, and we're going to start begin these conversations of removing and finding new ownership. And now this is just sort of makes it official. It's sort of seems like we've been talking about next steps for these two particular franchise and their ownership for a couple of months now, right? We're going October to November, and now here we are in December chatting about it. But similar to Paulson and the Thorns, there was no timeline that was placed on this announcement as well. That there's no timeline in terms of what a sale of Whistler's majority shares is going to look like. So I think for me, and I think I'm sure many out there, what does that mean for these two franchises, right? So you've got two franchises who have been in headlines across the last 2 years in NWSL, and then in October, the Yates report, all over the Yates report as well. So what does 2023 look like for these two franchises, as there is no timeline for a new stake and new ownership to be found and sold to new groups? So I think that's something that I think people are going to continue to try to keep an eye on and take a look at, because I think we saw with the Spirit, just to use that example because it's our most recent example, that wasn't something that happened overnight. That there was a lot of back and forth that took place with that, and a number of parties making sure that they had their respective side heard and their piece was said. So this isn't something I anticipate is going to happen overnight. I wouldn't be surprised if we have another update on either of these two franchises in terms of the process of their decision to sell, because the framework is in place already. We know sort of the key dates that are going to happen for NWSL in 2023 in terms of when preseason is going to start, when the regular season is going to kick off, right? We know the draft is going to happen on, in January. There's going to be the Challenge Cup within the regular season. There's a World Cup. Like, there's all these things that are going to be happening in 2023. So I would imagine that that's the reasoning to not have such a timestamp, a deadline on this type of process. But what that looks like for both of these clubs in the future, I think there's still some question marks around that.
Yeah, there's a lot of question marks, but and you mentioned how the process is not going to happen overnight. Even you think about the Yates investigation and when that started, when those results were released, early October, early days of October. Chicago players, Portland players making statements saying that they want their owners to find a new owner and to sell the team. So that happened in Chicago, October 10th. And now it comes early December. So nearly 2 months later is Arnim Whistler saying, yes, am going to now sell this club, because he was part of the problem, ignoring or minimizing complaints from players about coaches' behavior. And the fact that I touched on $35 million for Washington Spirit last year when it was sold to Michelle Kang. The number has been floated around $50 million figure for the Portland Thorns. How does Chicago fall into that? And we talked about Portland and how they do have the Timbers and they have Providence Park and they have a lot there. In Chicago, it looks a little bit different because they're not so associated with the Chicago Fire, and they play in SeatGeek Stadium. But how does that look moving forward? And it comes down a little bit of pressure on the NWSL board as to making sure you find an owner that is in line with everything that the league is in line with. Yes, the morals and the values and growing the league, but also there are new broadcast rights deals to be negotiated with in the upcoming year. There is going to be 2 new expansion sides coming into the league in future years. So how are they all on the same page, right? You don't look to get an owner that's going to be there for 3 to 5 years. You want an owner that's going to be there for the long term, that wants to invest in the club, in the city, and in the league. So there are big question marks around how this is going to happen. No timeline for this either as what's going on, but these are the first steps. There are plans in place now and people in place now to keep things running, but we'll see.
If people are only listening to podcasts, I don't mean to smile because I think this is a funny or jokey situation, but it's just, we keep talking about this, and I feel over the last 2 months, it's like, here's the next step, and then here's the next step, and then here's the other next step, and then here's the next step. And it's like the last 2 months, it sort of felt like just sort of dipping your toes into the water to sort of see what would be acceptable by public opinion. And it just was not working out, I think, for either of these owners, in terms of, I'm going to take a step back from decision making. No, that's I'm going to take a step back from day to day. No, that's not enough. I'm good. So it's like to sort of have this sort of finally feels like that real actual next step. It sort of feels
right, exactly.
Like, here it is.
And I think it's important, Lucy, shout out to you and our chat joining us live on YouTube, saying that Gotham has all those big names investors. And you look at Angel City, they have a number of big name investors. Gotham is doing the same thing. So that's also a direction that we could see maybe Chicago go in, to have a number of different investors, not just one put their name on it, but see who we can get, because Chicago's a big city, right? There's a lot of people that would be interested in this, that could throw some dollar bills at this club and see how they can advance it and accelerate the league. There are many different options to go for it. There are already people interested in the sale of the Portland Thorns. Now it's Chicago as well, and seeing how they can market these 2 different clubs in these cities.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm sure there's going to be tons to talk about as we keep our eyes on what's going to happen with this process.